There's a document that has existed for almost 2,000 years. It was buried in the Egyptian desert in 367 AD, not lost, buried, on purpose. When it was finally unearthed in 1945, scholars who read it didn't celebrate a discovery. They hesitated. Some still do. Because what it describes isn't history, it's a pattern you're living inside right now. It doesn't talk about gods in the sky or demons in the underworld. It talks about you, about the structure of your mind, about why you forget who you are the moment you wake up each day and step back into your life. The text is called the Apocryphon of John, and it reads like an ancient psychological manual written in the language of myth. But here's what makes people uncomfortable. It describes the world you know as a copy, a projection, an identity trap designed to make you forget there was ever anything else. Not a conspiracy, a structure, a cognitive loop. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You start noticing how thought works, how desire works, how you return to the same emotional patterns even when you swear you've moved on, how the world reflects not truth, but agreement, collective belief mistaken for reality. The Nag Hammadi texts were hidden because they threatened something foundational, not a government, not a religion, something deeper. They threatened the idea that you are only what you've been told you are, and the moment you read them with attention, something inside you recognizes the pattern, because you felt it before. You felt the strange sense that your entire life is scripted, that you're playing a role you never auditioned for, that beneath your name, your personality, your history, there's something else, something watching, something that doesn't belong to the story. The text calls this the self that existed before the world was made, and it says that self has been imprisoned inside a false identity so convincing you defend it as if it's you.
Before we go deeper, you need to understand something about how these texts were written. They weren't written for crowds. They were written for individuals who had already started to feel the crack, that subtle, growing sense that something about reality doesn't add up, that the life you're living is somehow secondary, a translation of something prior. Most people never feel this, or they feel it once and bury it under work, relationships, goals, distractions, anything to stop the vertigo. But some people can't bury it. It keeps surfacing, and when it does, it doesn't come as a thought. It comes as a mood, a silence, a question that has no words. The Apocryphon of John speaks directly to that question. It describes the origin of the world not as a creation of love, but as a mistake, a deviation, an entity called the Demiurge, a blind, arrogant intelligence that believed it was the only God, the only consciousness, the only reality. And from that belief, it constructed a system, a world structure designed to keep beings locked inside its own limited perception. The text says this isn't mythology, it's cosmology mapped onto psychology. The Demiurge isn't a villain in the sky, it's the egoic mind mistaking itself for the totality of what you are. And the world it creates, that's your identity, your self-concept, the story you tell yourself about who you are, what you want, what you fear, what you need to become. It feels real because you've never stepped outside it. It feels like you because you've been identified with it since childhood. But the text insists you existed before that identity was formed. You exist beneath it now, and you will exist after it dissolves. The problem is you've signed an unconscious agreement to forget that. Every day you wake up and re-sign it. You pick up the name, the role, the history, the personality. You step back into character. You perform yourself. And the system rewards you for it. Society rewards you. Other people reward you. Even your own thoughts reward you. But something in you knows it's a performance. And that knowing is what the text calls the divine spark.
The Nag Hammadi texts describe something most psychology doesn't touch. They describe forgetting as a structural feature of reality, not an accident. You didn't forget who you are because you're weak or distracted. You forgot because the system you're inside was designed to produce forgetting. Think about it. Every social structure you've ever entered, school, career, family, culture, operates by giving you an identity and asking you to defend it. You're a student, so you perform the role of student. You're an employee, so you internalize the logic of employment. You're a parent, so you become the parent. And slowly, incrementally, you stop noticing that you're performing. The role becomes you, or you become the role. The line blurs. This is what the text calls archons, not demons, not aliens, patterns, thought structures that govern perception. Each archon represents a mode of identification, a way the mind locks onto something external and says, this is me, this is mine, this is what I need. And once you're locked in, you defend it, you argue for it, you suffer for it, you organize your entire life around it. But here's the trap. The thing you're defending was never yours to begin with. It was given to you, taught to you, programmed into you through repetition, reward, and punishment. The Nag Hammadi texts say this process begins the moment you're born into a human body. You enter a world already structured by language, symbols, categories, and hierarchies. And those structures don't describe reality, they replace it. You learn the word tree, and you stop seeing the thing itself. You learn the word self, and you stop experiencing the consciousness prior to selfhood. You learn to name everything, to categorize everything, to control everything. And in doing so, you lose contact with what exists before naming. The texts call this the fall, but it's not moral, it's cognitive. It's the moment awareness collapses into identity, the moment presence becomes past and future, the moment you stop being and start becoming. And once you're in that mode, you can't stop, because becoming is addictive. It promises completion, it promises arrival. It says just a little more and you'll finally be whole. But you never arrive, because the structure itself is based on lack. You're always chasing, always improving, always fixing, always defending. And the Demiurge, the egoic structure, feeds on that. It sustains itself through your endless striving.
Here's where it gets uncomfortable. The Nag Hammadi texts suggest that most spiritual paths are part of the same system they claim to transcend. Because they still operate through identity. They still say, become this, achieve that, purify yourself, elevate yourself, transcend yourself. But the self they're asking you to transcend is the same self they're reinforcing by asking you to work on it. It's a loop, a recursive trap. The Demiurge doesn't care if you're materialistic or spiritual. It doesn't care if you're chasing money or enlightenment. What it cares about is that you're chasing, that you're identified, that you're locked into the program of becoming. Because as long as you're trying to become something, you're not recognizing what you already are. And what you already are, according to the texts, is not a project, not a process, not a story. You are the awareness in which all projects, processes, and stories appear. But that awareness has no identity, no name, no history, no goals. It doesn't improve, it doesn't evolve, it doesn't ascend. It simply is. And the moment you touch it, even for a second, the entire structure of your life feels thin, transparent, optional. This is what the text calls Gnosis, not knowledge, knowing. Direct, immediate, non-conceptual recognition of what you are beneath all concepts. But here's the double bind. The mind can't grasp it, because the mind is part of the system. Every time you try to think your way to Gnosis, you're using the very tool that creates the illusion of separation. The ego can't dissolve itself. It can only pretend to dissolve while secretly remaining in control. So the spiritual search becomes another identity, another performance, another way to feel special, elevated, chosen. And the texts warn against this explicitly. They say the Archons love spirituality because spirituality keeps you busy, it keeps you striving, it keeps you identified with the seeker. And as long as you're seeking, you're not seeing. You're not here. You're always one step ahead of yourself, chasing the next insight, the next breakthrough, the next level. But Gnosis isn't a level. It's not a state. It's not an achievement. It's the recognition that you were never not it. You were just convinced otherwise, and that convincing is so total, so seamless, that even now, reading this, part of you is resisting. Part of you is saying, this doesn't apply to me. I'm different. I'm awake. I'm aware. And that part, that's the Demiurge speaking.
There's a moment in the text that most people skip over. It describes the creation of the human being, but not as a single event, as a layered construction. First, there's the body, the biological form, the vehicle. Then there's the psyche, the personality, the emotional and mental patterns. And finally, hidden deep within, there's the pneuma, the spirit, the divine spark that doesn't belong to this system. But here's the problem. The pneuma is buried so deeply inside the psyche and the body that most people never access it. They live their entire lives inside the outer layers, inside the personality, inside the automatic reactions, the learned beliefs, the inherited traumas. And because those layers are all they know, they assume that's all there is. The text says this burial was intentional. The Demiurge designed the human structure so that the divine spark would remain unconscious, not destroyed, just forgotten. Because if it were destroyed, the system would collapse. The whole illusion depends on the presence of consciousness, but that consciousness has to remain unaware of itself. It has to believe it's the body. It has to believe it's the thoughts. It has to believe it's the person. And for most of human history, that's exactly what happened. But something has shifted. More and more people are starting to feel the friction, the gap between who they are and who they're pretending to be. They look at their lives and feel a strange distance, as if they're watching themselves from somewhere else. This is the pneuma waking up, the witness emerging. But here's the problem. The witness isn't a solution. It's a new trap. Because the moment you notice the witness, the ego claims it. It says, I am the witness. I am aware. I am awake. And now you're identified again, just at a subtler level. You're no longer identified with the body or the emotions. You're identified with awareness itself. And the Demiurge doesn't care, because you're still inside the structure. You're still playing the game. You're still defending a position. The text calls this the counterfeit spirit, the false witness, the egoic awareness that mimics true Gnosis, but still operates through separation. It feels like freedom because it's one step removed from the chaos of emotion and thought. But it's not freedom, it's detachment, and detachment is just another strategy of control. True Gnosis doesn't detach, it doesn't observe from a distance, it doesn't create a split between the seer and the seen. It collapses the boundary entirely. There's no one watching, there's just watching, just presence, just this. And the moment that happens, the entire structure reveals itself as empty. Not evil, not wrong, just empty, a play of patterns with no one at the center.
The Nag Hammadi texts weren't written to convince you of anything. They were written to activate something you already carry. Because the information they contain isn't new, it's primordial. It exists before language, before culture, before thought. It's the knowing that precedes every experience, the silence that holds every sound, the space in which every form appears and disappears. You've touched it before, in moments when the mind went quiet, in moments of beauty, terror, or deep exhaustion. For a split second, the commentary stopped, the inner dialogue paused, and there was just this, raw, immediate, undeniable. But then the mind returned, and it explained the moment. It categorized it. It filed it away as a nice experience or a strange feeling. And the moment became memory, and memory became story, and story became identity. This is how the signal gets buried in noise. The Demiurge doesn't silence the divine spark. It drowns it out. It floods your awareness with content, thoughts, desires, fears, plans, regrets, fantasies. It keeps you so busy managing the content that you never notice the container. You never notice the awareness that holds all of it. And that's the glitch. Because no matter how much noise the system generates, it can't touch the awareness itself. It can distract it, it can confuse it, it can convince it that it's something else, but it can't destroy it. And the Nag Hammadi texts were written to remind you of that. Not as a belief, not as a hope, as a fact. You are not the noise. You never were, and you never will be. But the system will keep telling you otherwise. It will keep offering you new identities, new goals, new problems to solve. Because the moment you stop identifying, the moment you stop defending, the moment you stop becoming, the entire game collapses. And that collapse is what the text calls liberation. But it's not dramatic, it's not ecstatic, it's not even noticeable to anyone else. You don't glow, you don't levitate, You don't gain special powers. You just stop believing the story. And when the story stops being believed, it stops having power. You still live, you still act, you still engage with the world, but you're no longer enslaved to it. You're no longer waiting for it to complete you. Because you realize there was never anything incomplete. That too was a story, a very convincing one, but still just a story. And stories only have power when they're mistaken for truth.
Here's what the text doesn't tell you directly, but implies through every line. You will forget again. Even after Gnosis, even after seeing through the structure, even after recognizing your true nature. You will wake up tomorrow, step back into your life, and the identity will reassemble itself. The thoughts will return, the desires will return, the fears will return. And for a moment, you'll wonder if any of it was real. If the recognition was just another experience, another spiritual high, another trick of the mind. This is the return loop, and it's the most dangerous part of the process. Because the Demiurge doesn't fight Gnosis directly. It waits. It lets you have your moment of clarity. It lets you feel free. And then it slowly, subtly pulls you back in. Not through force, through familiarity. You have bills to pay, relationships to maintain, responsibilities to honor. And so, you pick up the role again. You step back into character. You tell yourself it's just temporary, just until things stabilize. But things never stabilize, because the system is designed to keep you destabilized. It's designed to always give you one more problem, one more crisis, one more thing to fix. And each time you engage with it, you reinforce the pattern. You re-sign the agreement. The text describes this as the cycle of reincarnation, but it's not about lifetimes. It's about moments. Every moment you forget, you reincarnate. Every moment you identify, you're born again into the illusion. And every moment you remember, you die to it. But here's the thing. The system doesn't care if you die to it 1,000 times. It will still be there, still offering you an identity, still promising fulfillment. Because it's not trying to keep you forever. It's trying to keep you long enough. Long enough that you stop questioning. Long enough that you accept the game as inevitable. Long enough that you forget there was ever anything else. And for most people, that's exactly what happens. They see through it once, maybe twice. They feel the liberation, the lightness. And then life pulls them back, and they let it. Because the alternative feels too uncertain, too unsupported, too alone. And the text acknowledges this. It says the path of Gnosis is narrow, not because it's difficult, because it's unsupported by the world. The world doesn't reward you for waking up. It rewards you for playing along. And so you have to choose, moment by moment, whether to believe the story or recognize the storyteller. And most of the time, you'll choose the story, because it's easier, because it's familiar, because everyone else is choosing it too. But every now and then, in the gap between thoughts, in the silence between identities, you'll remember. And that remembering is enough. Let's be clear about something. The Nag Hammadi texts don't promise you a better life. They don't promise you peace, happiness, success, or love. They promise you the end of illusion. And the end of illusion doesn't feel the way you think it will. Because when the illusion drops, so does meaning. All the goals you had, all the dreams you carried, all the plans you made, they don't disappear, but they lose their weight. They stop feeling essential. They stop feeling like the point. And for a while, that creates a strange emptiness. Not depression, not nihilism, just space. A vast, quiet space where there used to be urgency. You still act, you still move through the world, but there's no one driving anymore, no one pushing, no one afraid of missing out. And people notice. They ask you what's wrong. They tell you you've changed. They say you seem distant, detached, cold. And you can't explain it, because how do you tell someone that you no longer believe in the game they're still playing? How do you tell them that the things they're chasing feel hollow to you now? Not because they're bad, not because they're wrong, but because you've seen through the mechanism that makes them seem important. You've seen that the value was always assigned, always agreed upon, never inherent. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. This is what the text calls the burden of Gnosis, because knowing doesn't set you free in the way the movies promise. It doesn't make you powerful. It doesn't make you special. It just makes you alone. Alone in a way that has nothing to do with isolation. You're alone because you're no longer participating in the shared hallucination. You're alone because you've stopped defending an identity. An identity is the glue that holds relationships together. People don't connect with you. They connect with the role they think you're playing. And when you stop playing it, they don't know what to do with you. The text says this is why the divine spark remains hidden for most people, not because they're unworthy, because the cost is too high. The cost is your entire life as you know it. Not literally. You don't have to quit your job or leave your family or move to a cave, but you do have to let go of the belief that any of it will ever complete you. You have to let go of the idea that you're building towards something, that you're progressing, that you're getting closer, because there's nowhere to get to. There's only here, and here doesn't need improvement. It just is. And when you stop trying to make it into something else, when you stop resisting it, rejecting it, or clinging to it, something shifts. Not in the world, in you. You stop suffering the world. You stop needing it to be different. And paradoxically, that's when you become most effective in it, because you're no longer acting from lack. You're no longer trying to prove something or escape something. You're just responding, naturally, immediately, without the filter of identity.
The Apocryphon of John ends in a strange way. It doesn't offer a conclusion. It doesn't wrap up the narrative. It doesn't tell you what to do next. It just stops, as if the author knew that any ending would be false. Any instruction would become another trap. Because the moment you turn Gnosis into a method, it becomes another system, another religion, another set of rules to follow. And the Demiurge loves rules. It thrives on them. It doesn't care if the rules are secular or sacred. As long as you're following something external, you're still inside the structure. So the text refuses to close. It leaves you in suspension. And that suspension is intentional, because Gnosis isn't something you achieve and then possess. It's something you return to, moment by moment, when the noise gets too loud and the story feels too heavy. It's the gap between thoughts, the pause between breaths, the silence that holds everything without being touched by anything. You can't practice it, you can't train for it, you can't get better at it. You can only notice it, and the noticing itself is it. But here's the final twist. The moment you try to hold on to the noticing, it's gone. Because holding is an act of the ego, and the ego is the thing that blocks the view. So you're left in a paradox. You can't grasp it, but you can't not be it. And the text seems to say, live inside that paradox. Don't resolve it, don't fix it, don't turn it into a philosophy. Just let it be what it is, a glitch, a crack, a momentary opening where the system reveals itself as construct. And in that opening, you remember, not a memory, not a thought, just a recognition. You were never the person you thought you were. You were never the story. You were never the role. You were always the awareness in which all of that appeared. And that awareness doesn't need saving. It doesn't need fixing. It doesn't need awakening. It just needs to stop pretending it's something else. The Nag Hammadi texts were buried for 16 centuries, and when they were found, they didn't change the world. They didn't spark a revolution. They didn't overthrow any system. They just sat there, waiting, for the few people who were ready to read them not as history, but as mirror. And if you've read this far, maybe you're one of them, not because you're special, but because the glitch has already activated in you. You've already felt the crack. You've already sensed the gap. And now you have a choice. You can go back to the story. You can re-identify. You can pretend this was just an interesting idea. Or you can stay in the gap a little longer, not to find answers, not to become enlightened, not to transcend anything, just to see what's here when you stop trying to be somewhere else.